Following is my second conversation with David Atkinson, CEO of zSphere. In this conversation, we continue with the theme of the first conversation on sustainable living, uh, especially in areas that are prone to climate related events, calamities. This time, uh, David takes us through his mission in Puerto Rico and all good things that he is doing, and he's trying to get different programs and missions going, and how those collaborations and coalitions are coming together. We also talk about how, from an engineering design perspective, there is a need for microgrids and micro utilities to supplement main grids, and how more distributed designs can help with uh, solving some of these problems of robustness, resilience, all that good stuff. And we continue to talk about the evolving designs of the zSphere infrastructure itself. David shares with us his roadmap for the next 18 to 24 months. I find this conversation very fascinating. Certainly, this is a topic of great interest to many of us. Climate is changing. There are no two ways about it. We need our best minds and attention on solving this problem. We all share planet Earth. This is our home. We don't live on Mars or any other such place. Some of those things are pipe dreams. Efforts should go toward saving Earth, at least majority of the efforts. And that's my personal point of view. I hope you enjoy this conversation with David. I look forward to your comments. Please don't forget subscribing to the Algo podcast channel. We work really hard to bring original, meaningful, and useful content to you without any commercial or any of those things. So just pure content, uh, straight to you in the most time efficient manner possible. Uh, and now, here is my conversation with David Atkinson. David, sir, how are you?
I'm well, Amjad. Thank you, and hope you're the same.
Yes, sir. And welcome back to the Algo podcast. Our audience really enjoyed your our first conversation. Certainly, it is also very timely. We are living in the midst of several uh, hurricanes and their aftermath. So, a lot today to talk about. So, kind of just to set the stage. I know that you have been spending some quality time in Puerto Rico, so we'll talk about that, and then want to explore this topic of micro utilities with you. Plus, I'm sure that there are so many other things to talk about. So, just over to you, and Les, I think maybe if it's okay, start with your most recent trip and progress to date. Over to you, sir.
Very good. Thank you. So great to be back and for a follow-up here. And as you say, it's quite timely, as was our trip to Puerto Rico. So myself and my senior leadership that is overseeing our go-to-market in Puerto Rico, it is our focus nearly 100% because of the state of the mindset and other factors on the island in terms of certainly the vast need to rebuild and the massive amounts of capital that are available on the island, to the tune of well over 50 and $60 billion in public and private capital. So myself and the team spent 9 days on the island. And candidly, to put it into perspective, there's a tollway that goes basically from east to west across the island. And everyone who's traveled on a tollway will be able to understand kind of a frame of reference here. We spent several $100s on tolls in the 9 days on the island, moving back and forth and systematically having meetings. It wasn't haphazard. It was what my executive vice president, Charlie DeFelice, and Charlie Serrano, our head of sales and director of strategic relationships on Puerto Rico. They do an outstanding job of filling our schedule. We were nonstop from approximately 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 or 11 o'clock every day, with very strategic meetings and meaningful insights into understanding the very real and legitimate need for our solutions on the island. And so let me kind of give you a quick recap of what we did. So we spent 9 days on the island, and our focus this time was on specifically determining and deciding where we are going to go to market first. And when I say that, the shortest path for us as a startup to revenue is in the private development opportunities that we have on the island. As I shared, there are tens of billions of dollars in state and federal funding available, but we know that those opportunities are going to take 9 to 12 months to really play out. Even though we've spent over a year laying the foundation and groundwork, it's the nature of things on the island. And so our focus was on private real estate opportunities. We saw a dozen different properties, of which one of the properties you see behind me is a 200+ acre piece of land that is owned by the family of a close relationship of ours. Actually, it's 1 degree of separation. And the reason why we are being entertained and people are reaching out to us and so eager and they're approaching us in earnest is because they recognize the solution that we have is the right solution for Puerto Rico. This area here that you see behind me is on the West Coast. The sunsets are stunning, quite candidly, and the beaches are beautiful. And so it was a very difficult decision, but we came away from our trip deciding on 3 distinct opportunities that we are going to very quickly go to contract on. And one or more of those might be joint venture, because a few of the relationships are very interested in a long-term partnership, very well-established developers on the island. And they understand that what we have is a longer-term strategy and solution for the island. There's a lot of rebuilding and a lot of work to do, as well as there's a tremendous shortage of long-term housing, as well as vacation and tourism type housing. I challenge anyone to try and go get an Airbnb rental on the west end of the island. Anything that sits on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday is booked out for months. You may be able to get something Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but during the peak times, it's impossible to get anything for months out. So very revealing in terms of the legitimate and real demand there. And quite honestly, Amjad, many of these properties are not even listed on Airbnb. The demand is generated strictly through word of mouth and very reputable, hosts and everything else. So, and Puerto Rico is, when you're talking about the people of Puerto Rico, very genuine, very, warm and welcoming. It has rough areas, just like any typical urban area. And so you've got to know where you're going and who you're with. But in general, island wide, everyone that I've personally met with and dealt with would give you the shirt off their back. So very, very privileged and pleased in building relationships with the people of Puerto Rico. I personally, as well as any of my staff that currently doesn't reside there, will be emigrating to Puerto Rico here probably over the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
It makes sense for us to do that because there is so much work to be done there.
Yep.
And, logistically with, travel restrictions and everything else, it just makes more sense for us to begin to establish ourselves, more locally and be able to spend more time on the ground there.
No, that makes perfect sense. Any other thing, David, from that you want to share in terms of some next progress or updates that came from that trip, or just if in the audience there are people who can be who want to partner with you, any information that you would like to share with them in that regard?
Certainly. So as you can imagine, I'm just scratching the surface relative to the amount of time that we spent on the island. So I did multiple interviews, of which will be airing. I encourage you to go to LinkedIn and look me up on LinkedIn, David Atkinson, and you'll see anything associated with zSphere. And those interviews will be airing here over the next week or two. So we did interviews. We attended multiple investment group meetings and met with investors. So we're making significant progress there. And there are still opportunities to invest with us. I encourage you to go to our website, myzsphere.com, click on the invest button. If you have a vested interest in Puerto Rico, then we give you the opportunity and a platform to invest via a platform called Invest Puerto Rico. And then or if you're domestic here in the US and you'd prefer a platform that is here in the US, then we have the alternative fundable platform, and you can look at our investment opportunity there. So the other meaningful thing that transpired is we didn't spend a whole lot of time with municipalities this trip, but we did spend time with a municipality, which I can't name because there's some very particular things that we're doing there. But what I do want to share with your audience is that the things that we are doing are laying the foundation for a next generation of investment opportunities and growth and advancement of the island of Puerto Rico. There's a significant amount of I want to be very selective with my words here. There's a significant amount of concern and unease and frankly disdain for the lack of progress and the lack of effort in restoring and rebuilding the island. After the events of Maria, Irma, and the earthquakes in 2020, Puerto Rico lost over 30,000 buildings.
Yeah.
So let me put a little bit into perspective. So the best, largest construction company, of which myself and my team have met with the CEO and their staff, the best that they can do on an annual basis is construction of just over 500 units. And when I say that, I mean, permanent housing and or resort type of structures. So when you do the quick math in your head, you very quickly come to realize that that's 15 or more years if it's just that individual developer. So there's a distinct need, given the existing demand, as well as the need for reconstruction of schools, other critical infrastructure with municipalities, residential, commercial. And so people are quickly beginning to understand that we really need to take a step back and do things differently. And zSphere, frankly, our market timing could not be better, because everyone is beginning to recognize that zSphere is the future, right? It's certainly a departure visually, but with respect to the mentality on the island, they're such that you know what, visually, it's actually, it's next, it's next generation, it's state of the art. And frankly, it is completely compatible in addressing and dealing with climate change and the very real challenges that we have here on the island in terms of power stability and other issues. More frequent hurricanes expected in the near future, and just a general level of investment protection. So very, very revealing in that respect. The municipality that we met with, they are very progressive minded. And when I mean progressive minded, I mean they're visionaries, but they're also go-getters, right? They understand that, look, if we're gonna say this, we're gonna do it. And so we had some very, very in-depth conversations with them around laying out a plan and a framework for introducing resilient utilities into the municipality, as well as general construction of their of resilient structures for their critical infrastructure and certainly their other resident needs. So very revealing.
And maybe from here, David, we talk a little bit about what is happening here in the continental United States. So what is your advice, thoughts, suggestions for how FEMA and others should plan better or think about all these hurricanes that we are in the middle of? So Louisiana and Northeast, they are dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, and you and I, we both know that is not the last one. And the intensity and volatility and frequency, it's all on the rise. And also, David, maybe this time we talk a little bit about not just on the policy level, but technology level. Do you see universities like MIT or Caltech or Stanford or other reputable universities? You are in Atlanta, and you have Georgia Tech and other great schools. That what sort of things you think universities can bring to the table from artificial intelligence technology perspective and helping attack different parts of the problem and coming up with more resilient, robust solutions, and a policy level change in Washington about how to think about these things. I mean, if you think about it, David, I'm stealing your words here. We are like under attack. I mean, this is hugely disruptive to the life that we are used to as citizens of the United States, and it's a global problem. So I would be very interested to hear your thoughts both on the policy front as well as on the technology front.
Yes, Amjad, thank you. So, boy, that's a
I know it's a mouthful
to crack. but let's approach it in a very structured way. So first of all, it's we've got the latest IPCC report. We've got other reports that are beginning to come out that, frankly, and I look at those and I look at those with a very particular vision. And when I say that, I mean that you always must look at things from a very logical and a very pragmatic perspective. And so, as we're seeing in the world that we live today, there are tremendous forces at work that are trying to get us as human beings to change our behaviors in terms of the way that we, whether we travel or the way we consume things. And so it's very important to look past those behavioral things in those reports and really look at the important context of the reports. And the important context of the reports is that fundamentally, and Ida just demonstrated this clearly, and I'm going to talk about Ida here in a moment and the relevance to much of what you shared. So why those reports and the data and everything in them is important from a pragmatic standpoint is when I started this project, and as I continue through it and in our discussions with private and public sides of the equation, the one common thread in the entire thing is commerce. Obviously, safety and conveniences, those things are important, but what is most important is commerce. And so when you look at municipalities, let's say in Puerto Rico, in Puerto Rico, there's over 70 municipalities. Some are thriving, others are not. And so when you look at, and the same can be said for US municipalities, many of our rural municipalities have been left behind. And you look at the mom and pop storefronts, and you look at all of those small businesses and everything that have been idled, right? And those buildings are idle and everything else. So you take a step back and you say, well, how do we revitalize those areas? And so the conversations that have been had in Puerto Rico around reinvigorating commerce and drawing capital and drawing commerce to a particular area. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing that I'll say is, because it's Puerto Rico, hurricanes are incredibly disruptive to the power grid.
Yeah.
So, and when I mean, look at New Orleans. New Orleans, there is a significant amount of people that are going to be without power for weeks or months in New Orleans, in the New Orleans area. So Puerto Rico is no exception. In fact, I would venture to say that they are actually worse off, just because the way the grid has been patched over 100 years. And so what is meaningful to these municipalities in terms of reinvigorating them? Well, reinvigorating a municipality means that you have to do something that draws people to your municipality. So at the very foundation, we've been having discussions with the municipalities as well as our private developers that the significance of our solution when it comes to that challenge exactly is this. If you implement, for example, and we're going to talk about our micro utilities, but let me start with resilient municipal critical infrastructure, resilient communities, et cetera. So the way you draw people and capital to an area that has historically declined or dwindled in that is you introduce stable, consistent power.
Yeah.
Right. And so what then winds up happening is, after a hurricane and an event in Puerto Rico, then what happens is people begin to understand and realize, because candidly, Amjad, with our society today, where there's power, there's water, there's working facilities, and there's life, right? Yep. So in our discussions, it became blaringly obvious to our potential clients that, hey, you know what? This is a way for me to reinvigorate and create a competitive differentiator amongst the 70 plus municipalities and other developments that are going on there. Hey, you know what? It's meaningful for me to have nonstop power in the event of a hurricane. Yeah. Because, whether you're a commercial business or you're a resident or you're a municipality, that attracts life. It attracts commerce, it attracts people, et cetera. So that was very meaningful in the grand scheme of things. And let me shift gears here and let's talk about Ida specifically. So the first thing I'm going to point out, and for those of you following me on LinkedIn and looking at my posts, thank you. And I encourage you to follow me if you're not already, and comment. I love the comments and want to have more of an interactive type of discussion, and that will evolve over time as people begin to continue to learn more about us. But in terms of IDA, let me just share this very stark statistic. So one of my posts was around the effect on New Orleans power grid immediately after IDA passed. And that post revealed and showed that although there were over $150 billion spent regionally on the restoration of New Orleans, they could not do better than 1% of availability in the power grid. 99% of the power grid was offline immediately after the storm, and a significant amount of the power grid is still offline less than a week later. So the moral of the story is what zSphere and what our resilient utilities bring to the table is we bring resilient resources such that if you are going to spend money as a municipality, as a state, as a local developer, or a business owner, or even someone in terms of their residents, if you're going to, there's I would venture to guess, Amjad, because Katrina was, over 10 years ago, right? I would venture to guess that inflation-adjusted terms, IDA is going to be more costly than Katrina.
Yeah.
So the question becomes to your audience is, and those out there in that region, can you afford not to build back resiliently this time? And I think the fact that was such nearly an identical repeat of Katrina. It was different in many respects in terms of they did some great work in terms of the levees, and they kept some of the flooding at bay. But in terms of electrical availability, which is really the economic disruptor, this is all about continuity of business and life. And so, the levees are important, but when you really get down to brass tacks, what's most important is maintaining continuity of business, society and life. And so that's what we are all about. And I would highly recommend any other municipalities where we have already been approached by Lake Charles, Louisiana. They have a very progressive minded a mayor and staff. And we look forward to entertaining them for a visit here as we continue to build out our model home in Kingsland, Georgia. And we will be sharing announcements with others in terms of when we are ready to host, further open houses and things like that. We want people to see what we have. And so I encourage those municipalities and others out there that have a desire to build back resiliently, please reach out to us. And we would love to be in touch with you and share with you, begin the dialogue around, okay, what does it cost? And how can we change the dynamic such that these type of repeat events are mitigated or moderated in the future?
One question, David, I have for you is, and I am certainly not technically knowledgeable in this regard, but on the topic of reliable power and a reliable smart grid, we see in countries like Iceland, they have no on-the-ground poles or any of that. Everything is all underground, which may or may not be applicable to all different jurisdictions. So when you look into hurricanes, whether Katrina, whether Ida, you see two things that are very obvious. You first see a lot of water in unwanted places, and suddenly you want, strategies for water channeling and what have you. And you mentioned levees and canals and stuff that we are building. But then you see all these power poles on the ground and whatnot. What is your thinking on in 2021 as we think about enhancing our grid and embracing for a planet that is going to become more unstable is kind of what all the indications are. How do we go about building smart grids and a more robust, resilient power infrastructure? You made such an astute point on if power is there, then there is life, there is commerce, all those things that we cherish as values in our lives. Power is such a huge enabler for that. So how to design for a safe power? Certainly power would, ensure less disruption into our ways of life, into our supply chains, into all those types of things. So I'm sure you have studied this issue or have point of views on how to design, such things. To a layman like me, a solution that requires erecting poles doesn't look like a 21st century solution, but maybe there it is. But then I also know parts of the world, like, this example of Iceland, where you do not see anything, on the ground. Everything is underground. I'm sure they have three-phase power and they have, high voltage at the source. And as they get closer to the consumption points, they have distributions and transformers and all that stuff. But somehow they have figured it out. And when Iceland is covered by ice storms and those types of things, the country still goes on. So I would love to hear your perspective on this whole, how to take our fledgling power grid infrastructure into 21st century.
Certainly. So I'm going to break that down into really two components. And these were two things that we focused on primarily as we continue to refine our go-to-market and relative to the solutions and the value that we create. So first and foremost, and this also applies to the Northeast that was just ravaged by flooding, throughout Philadelphia and certainly New York and New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So fundamentally, the first value proposition that the Z-Sphere provides, and in Puerto Rico especially, the first value proposition, the Z-Sphere is mounted up off the ground, right? It is a sphere. It is all above ground. So the first thing that we did was we focused on the chronic problem in terms of cost relative to every natural disaster on the planet, or the most common. By far, the lion's share, over 80% of damage that is caused by natural disasters due to water intrusion and water damage. You look at the pictures of the flooded streets and the flooded shops and homes and everything else. So the first thing that we did was create a watertight structure, especially on the bottom. And so what that does for our clients is that remediates, a significant percentage of the problem right off the top in terms of economic loss. Because remember, this is about addressing economic loss.
Yeah.
How do we minimize the economic loss? And how do we get back on our feet quickly and get things restored to normal as fast as possible? So we address the flooding problem, number one. That's why the sphere is above the ground. And secondarily, being able to provide our clients with standalone, or if you're an individual residence, or micro utility if you're a resilient community or a city center, municipality, whatever it may be, we're seeing, Amjad, we are seeing in these regions, the technology is available now. It may have not been available decades ago, but it is available now for you to put high voltage underground and maintain the water tightness and safety of it, because it really boils down to a safety issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, the real issue with those high voltage lines is just keeping them away, them away from people and people out of harm's way. And so there's a lot of rethinking going on. The municipality that we met with, I'm pretty confident that the funding that they have available to them, they are going to begin to put the at least the mains underground. And then they're going to start using things like concrete and other highly resilient, polymer, fiber, telephone power poles that are extremely resilient to winds, and gusts. The island of St. Croix actually spent millions of dollars on upgrading their power infrastructure in the last major event they had about 10 years ago. And so it's very obvious as you travel through the island, they built their distribution infrastructure correctly. Now, that said, the one thing that's different in our approach, and that I encourage anyone listening and anyone in the future that listens to this, the one thing that I strongly encourage you to do is to reevaluate your production and distribution design. And what I mean by that is distributed micro utilities are the future. Because when you have a natural disaster strike an area, if you have a centralized power plant, if the bulk of that disruption is where that power plant is, it means that you're taking offline an entirely large geographical area. And so by implementing smaller microgrids, what you're doing is you're increasing your resiliency overall in a distributed framework of power production and power distribution. So the net effect of a population is much less from that storm or that event, because you're far more able to coordinate and bring back online distribution in a smaller type of fashion than you are on this, large geographical area, right? Let's say a town versus a county, type of sizing. So microgrids are the future. Z-sphere resilient microgrids are the future. And again, strongly encourage anyone that was dramatically affected by Ida, especially on the power infrastructure side, that has any sort of influence at a county or municipal level, to reach out to us and begin those dialogues. We've been having those dialogues with the municipalities of Puerto Rico for well over a year now. So we're very advanced in terms of the realities in working with power companies and whoever it may be in the entire process to make those a reality.
Do you, David, run into or can mention any communities or municipalities or towns that are already adopting this strategy of microgrids? I can see the benefits of robustness and resilience. I can also see the fact that, since they serve a more localized area, that in the event that they are down, the impact is less. I also know that if there are many nodes in the network and no single node is a center of gravity type node, the network overall can support the down nodes well, and all that good stuff. So are there designs, works, or even examples of such microgrid projects, David, that you are aware of, that you can share, even if they are at a pilot stage or, and not fully operationalized yet?
There are, and sadly, there's only really one in Puerto Rico, and it's in Northwest Puerto Rico. There's a very progressive mayor, and frankly, the name of the municipality escapes me. I've been dealing with several dozen, but at the end of the day, there is one that is a tremendous case, for the rest of the island. But they still contend with very conventional challenges around diesel fuel and other issues. They happen to be generating their own power, but when you are still generating your own power and by conventional means, you still run into the same logistical challenges that the other municipalities are in a more centralized type of distribution, right? Availability of diesel fuel, blocked roads, tanker trucks can't get to the generators to refill them, things like that.
One thing,
So
David, that you
great
mentioned.
question.
Yeah, no, thank you. One thing that you mentioned last time was that in the design of the Z-Sphere or the dome, the structure at some level is taking advantage of the air, the wind, that dynamics, and is able to seize that power and convert that into, electricity, at least in your vision down the road. You want to maybe talk a little bit more about refreshing everybody's mind about that vision where the sphere not only is keeping you safe in your moment of need and from water, from wind, from an earthquake, but also from a grid power loss, because it has a lot of self-sufficiency and self-resilience built into it. So I would love if you want to just take us through those designs or ideas about the self-reliance of the unit and the availability of the power when you need it most, when you cannot count on the availability of grid, because, as we just talked about, the microgrids, they are in planning, ideation, conversation stages, mostly at the progressive municipality level, but they are not a ground reality yet. But, we all are living where these weather events, they hit us. So maybe you want to just take us through that aspect of the Z-Sphere again.
Yeah, certainly. So we're approaching nonstop essential needs in a couple of ways. So when we have a situation where we have, let's say, a handful of Z-Sphere structures and we're building a small resilient community, maybe for Airbnb for one of our clients, whatever it might be. When we're doing that, we have developed standalone systems per sphere. So we're generating those essential needs with our power appliance, with our freshwater appliance, et cetera, on an individual sphere basis. And one of the unique things that we've done is we've taken advantage of the spherical shape of it. The wind, because it's a sphere, the wind doesn't even hardly know it's there, which is why we're able to, in our standard configuration, sustain 200-mile-an-hour, winds on a sustained basis. And so, given that characteristic, I took a step back and I said, well, if our clients need power, if typically 100% of clients experience a power outage during a hurricane, what are the variables, what are the factors that we can take advantage of, given the wind is blowing so hard, right? And so what we've done is, over the last several months, I've collaborated with our team, and we have developed, actually, I'm in the process of submitting the patent application for this as we speak. And what we've done is we have created a wind power generation system, the first of its kind. We've created the first and only, at this point, wind power generation system that works optimally during a hurricane. So when do you need power most? You need power most when your solar panels are blocked, right? You've got clouds and there's no sunlight during a hurricane, right? You're generating no solar power during a hurricane,
Yeah,
but what do you have a lot of? You have a lot of wind.
that's
And so
right.
what we did, we took a step back and we said, okay, how can we generate power for our customers during the hurricane instead of relying on propane generators or diesel generators or something like that? And so we figured out a design to take advantage of the spherical shape and the nature of the sphere with a wind generator that allows us to generate power for our clients nonstop all the way during the storm. It doesn't matter if it's 200 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour. That wind generator will always generate power at the optimal output during those events and subsequently provide our clients with power.
One comment, David, that I got from one of the people who watched the last episode was that on your website, which is very informative, that it would be good for you to add simulations for people to see, okay, I'm going to increase the wind speed, I'm going to simulate this condition and that condition, and what happens to the sphere. And their idea was that since, to your point, it is a sphere, a lot of mathematics of simulation come handy to build amazing high quality, high fidelity simulations. And the idea was that you should consider, perhaps you already are, working with city planning or urban planning departments, civil engineering departments of universities, Georgia Tech, MIT, whatever, Caltech, Stanford, many, many other great examples that you can select handful of them and see if they work with you and build some high quality simulations for people to feel more comfortable about that. Okay, I have not seen one, fully physically yet. Certainly you're working on, capturing more and more of that information. Nothing like that, those types of test results. But I think having a simulation, a rich simulation on your website, it looks like would be helpful. I'm sure you're already thinking about something like that or have something like that, but I promised that I would pass that comment on to you. So any thoughts on that comment?
Yeah. Yes, and thank you for that invaluable feedback, and I welcome any and all of those questions. Since we are a startup, right? There's an evolution and there's a progress here, and the wind generator is. I don't want to say it's a recent development, but it's new enough, and frankly, the spherical design alone is tough in terms of bringing that to market. And now our focus has shifted now that we've got past and figured out our sphere, our structures, our other resilient, footings and foundations. Now our focus has shifted to the ancillary things that add additional value to the sphere. So great question. I'm just going to say right on the podcast, I welcome any and all universities that have expertise in this space. I welcome those introductions and those conversations. We are actively looking for one or two universities to strategically partner with in bringing our solutions to market. We recognize the value in those relationships. We're already beginning to do that with various universities in Puerto Rico, and I welcome that here in the U.S. Whether it's your alma mater, Amjad, MIT, or Georgia Tech, University of Florida. I've reached out to several, but I welcome those dialogues and those conversations. Thank you.
Yeah. Another comment, David, that I got was that I promised that I will pass it on to you was, as you and I predicted in the first conversation, that what you are doing should and will resonate with these cyber cryptocurrency communities. So one idea or thought that somebody shared with me was that there are numerous places or exchanges on the web these days for a company like Zsphere to reach out to crypto investors, people who would want to invest with their Ethereum, their Bitcoin, and many other altcoins that are out there. So just sharing that with you, that it looks like that you have people who are aligned with your vision in the cryptocurrency community. So I'm sure that is on your radar.
Absolutely. And I'll share this. So we have been actively engaged with one of the largest cryptocurrency individuals, by measure of wealth on the island. And I can't drop any names, but we are actively engaged in the community. And thank you so much for bringing that up for the podcast. It is something we are actively engaged with. Can we do more? Can we have more engagement? Absolutely, we can. And again, I welcome any and all communication and folks to reach out to us in that space. I personally believe that in the future, we are going to have a use case in which we are hosting cryptocurrency mining in our sphere with resilient power and everything else, so that those mining activities can happen and as we talk about what makes the Zsphere micro utility special, as we begin that conversation, you're going to quickly understand that it is solar power based. So places like the Caribbean, which have a tremendous, solar exposure every year, are ideal places for solar-based power utilities. However, you have the variable of, natural disasters and hurricanes and earthquakes in those regions that you have to contend with. Well, the Zsphere represents a solution to both of those challenges, and a very good solution, in that we're able to protect the assets that those cryptocurrency miners have invested a tremendous amount of money in. And we're also able to maintain continuity of mining even during a natural disaster like a hurricane.
Love it, love it. One other question, David, that came was that part of the reason that we are in the situation that we are is because of how we as people, we as humans, we are or have been living on planet Earth, our consumption habits, our living habits, and that kind of a thing. And unless that changes, everything else is just a Band-Aid. So the question that people asked were that when you are out there in Puerto Rico, what are the thoughts on smart consumption, produce less, consume better, less waste, putting waste to good use, reducing carbon footprint, being good citizens of planet Earth? So I promise that I will ask this question, that are people thinking along those lines, or what can or should be done to start those conversations as well? Because if we just keep producing and keep consuming like we are today and keep increasing to the waste profile, then we cannot fight that chemistry and its aftermath. There is no amount of catch up that can help us get there, and that kind of a thing. And instability would continue to accelerate. So, and every change kind of begins at home. So how are these communities thinking about more earth-friendly living?
Yes. So the first thing that I'll say is that is the foundation of every conversation that we have had. Over the 9 days of our trip, that is the number one. All of those elements that you just described are the fundamental drivers of our not only our interactions with our prospective clients, but those are the quintessential foundation of our business model. Is that unless we introduce a new standard of living and a new model of living, unless you're able to introduce that sort of structural change, then you don't have the meaningful lasting impact over time unless you make a structural change. And so myself and my team discussed extensively how do we assist our prospective clients and municipalities and our private clients in implementing a structural change that brings meaningful value, but that also tackles very specifically all of those things that you just addressed. So great question. And I'm here to tell you that we are checking all of those boxes. They are the primary drivers of everything that we do.
This last question that came from our first episode is also from an audience member, and their thing was, it was more of a suggestion that we all live our lives where we are at our homes and stuff in our communities, and life is lived 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time. And this specific suggestive question was that it would be awesome if there is a app or a methodology or something like that, whereby a household, no matter where that household is, can figure out what their consumption is, what their carbon footprint is, way above and beyond, the recycling and those types of efforts that people are involved in. So, and I looked up, I couldn't find any solution for households to say, okay, my household, my consumption, what am I doing and my household doing to planet Earth? What is my contribution to CO2 emissions? How far away I am from, as a household, from carbon neutrality. So I was saving this as a last question for today. So that came as both as a question and recommendation that it would be good if Z-Sphere or companies like that or individuals like you create tools for people everywhere, households everywhere, to say, okay, now we give you a way to measure, track, manage, and then, hopefully bring whatever those metrics are into a desirable range. Because until we start measuring, this person who made this recommendation said, well, unless a problem directly hits you, you always think of problems as somebody else's problem. It is not my problem. I am fine here in my wonderful living in Midwest. It is a problem for Puerto Rico. It's a problem for Bangladesh. It is not a problem for me. But no, we all are making contributions.
That's right. And first of all, I love your audience. I love the questions, and please keep them coming. Ironically, the questions that your audience continues to bring to bear really puts a huge spotlight on the value proposition that we at zSphere are bringing to the table. So I'm going to address that question head on. And so I shared with your audience the last time that I'm a complex systems expert. So when I've engineered and designed all of these systems for use in the zSphere, because I'm a data guy, I'm Judd, we have a lot of similarities there. We're all about the data. If you have good data, then you're able to make meaningful decisions. So within the next 18 to 24 months built into our business model and our business plan, within the next 18 to 24 months, we will have our first version of a fully automated and very data and experience rich client experience within the zSphere. And what do I mean by that? So it's kind of like a fuel tank and a fuel gauge in your car, right? If you have no idea how many miles you've traveled, and if you have no idea your capacity of fuel, then you have no bearing on how far you can drive, right? And so using that analogy, we are going to be doing similar things in our engagement and experience for our clients, whether it's a fixed interface or on your phone or whatever it may be. We'll probably do both, quite candidly. And what's going to happen is your sphere will provide you with the information that you need in order to understand, okay, you've got a 7-day reserve of potable fresh water, or you've got 3 days of reserve capacity in your batteries based on your current level of consumption and current solar exposure. So on the run up to a hurricane event, you're going to intimately know and understand, okay, I've got enough water, I've got enough power, I've got everything that I need in order to weather the hurricane. And of course, it's not going to stop there. We're going to do the essential blocking and tackling first with those essential needs, and then it's going to expand beyond there. Part of the value proposition that we're bringing to the table is the collective base of this information and using those data points together in order to provide not only our clients a meaningful experience, but our commercial customers, our municipalities, whoever it may be. All those data points are meaningful. I'll share something else. Many of the weather stations that were in the path of Ida actually went offline when it reached 100 miles an hour wind velocity or more. And so one of the unique things that we will be incorporating into the zSphere is the ability to have all of those very specific telemetries in a hardened type of package, such that we can very effectively measure from a given sphere those different telemetries, and then utilize other spheres and other data points to put together a very nice picture for a given region or a given area where those spheres reside. And then also, maybe live streaming video, things like that, which actually further improve the experience and the quality of the data. One of the things that enables us to do that is the fact that we are implementing and providing our clients with a fully resilient communication methodology as well, that is satellite based. It is not cellular or conventional based. It is satellite based and resilient, such that we can maintain communications continually, even during the hurricane and the high wind speed events. And shifting gears here to the micro utilities. So this is meaningful for us. And you might be asking yourself, well, what is a zSphere micro utility? Well, the first and foremost thing to remember is it's disaster resilient, right? You in the areas where we are redefining real estate and we're redefining what it's like to live in areas that are prone to natural disasters, you got to have resilient utilities, right? And I was at an investor event with Uncommon Entrepreneurs Thank you again for hosting us, Drew and Brian. So at that event, I asked the audience the question because they had recently experienced significant outages on the island of power. And I asked everybody, hey, who here has experienced a power outage in the last week? And the vast majority of hands went up in the audience. So on an island as affluent, a tourism area and everything else, they are still experiencing chronic power outages. So it's a real problem. So resiliency is imperative, right? Resilient to these continual, changes in our climate and curveballs that we're going to experience here over the next, decade plus. The other thing that it has to have is nonstop operation, right? It has to be 24/7. Yeah. And part of the challenge that we have with solar panels and battery systems is they're not 24/7, and they're not able to achieve real base load power 24 hours a day for clients. So they're very cost effective, but they're very niche oriented. They're great for supplemental and things like that. But we really have to look to alternatives for providing those 24/7 solutions. The other thing that it has to be, it's certainly resilient to climate change, but it has to be able to withstand a variety of disasters in a single package. So I'll give you an example. On the island of Puerto Rico, southwestern Puerto Rico, they experienced over 8,000 magnitude 4 or greater earthquakes in 2020. 11,000, wow. Right? The ground is shaking all the time. So that area of the island is also prone to hurricanes and flooding. So having a diverse solution that can accommodate all of those natural disasters in a single solution is imperative, right? Lastly, you want to have a system or a solution that is dynamic. And when I say dynamic, I mean dynamic in being able to address multiple needs in a single solution. Okay, it can generate power. Can it, like in the Caribbean, can it desalinate water, right? Or can it maybe create hydrogen, right? You're seeing a tremendous amount of research and development in the hydrogen space, right? That's a very viable, power alternative that billions of dollars are being invested in, research and development. So, having a diverse solution in terms of what it provides is also very important. So when you think about a Z-sphere micro-utility, I want you to think about all those things, right? Resilient to climate change, resilient to multiple disasters in a single package, 24/7 operation, and able to provide multiple things of value in a single solution. And so that's what a Z-sphere micro-utility is. And so, what makes it unique, right? What provides you all that value? And so what we've done is we've partnered with a company and a technology provider called WeSolar CSP. It's WeSolarCSP.com. They are a startup much like ourselves. They've been in business and starting to take their product to market over the last few years. They're also much like us, open to investment. And if you have an interest in that space, I strongly encourage you to contact them via their website, or certainly reach out to myself and I can put you in touch with their CEO, Steve Anglin. And the technology, the ASC technology that they have is based on concentrated solar. And you may have seen in the past concentrated solar farms like out in the desert in Spain and other places that are bringing this revolutionary technology to market. But what it does is they use sunlight to create heat, intense heat, that they then store in like in a thermal store. So think about a hot water tank, right? What do? You heat up water. It's thermally insulated. It stores that hot water for when you need it. So think of a very similar principle around concentrated solar. We're heating up a medium, right? Whether it's some use molten salts, some use sand, some use other mediums. And what happens is you heat up this thermal store, and then you size that thermal store based on the amount of power and consumption that you're going to have over a 24-hour period. And when you size it appropriately, what it does is it provides you a 24/7 solution. So you're intaking and creating and storing this heat during the day, and then what whether you're using a steam turbine generator or water desalination, whatever, the heat from that thermal store is what drives that for a 24-hour period. And so when sized appropriately, it becomes a 24/7 solution. And so that's why we have partnered with them. We knew we needed a 24/7 solution, and concentrated solar is frankly one of the top viable solutions for a 24/7 solution, especially in the Caribbean. And so that partnership is very important.
I think everybody can, David, use it. I mean, that is a very novel, innovative idea.
It is. Yeah. It absolutely is. And the reason our partnership made sense for Steve and his team as well as ours is that, you have a solar concentrator. Well, then you have other critical pieces of the puzzle, like a steam turbine, power generator, or water desalination equipment, whatever it may be. That critical infrastructure needs to also be resilient and be protected. So our partnership, what we do is we use the solar concentrator that's highly wind resilient, by the way. And we use that solar concentrator to generate the heat, but then we use a Z-sphere that's adjacent to that concentrator to store the critical infrastructure, and thus you have a fully resilient solution. And so that was meaningful to us, finding a partner that was very complementary to us, and being able to create distinctly separate things of value, whether it is, not many people realize, islands in the Caribbean have a chronic problem of availability of good potable water. They just do. It does rain a lot, but unless you have the right systems in place to, harvest that water and utilize that water effectively, it's nearly impossible to use it on a broad basis. So the Z-sphere solution, in tandem with WeSolar in our standalone systems, we are addressing that freshwater challenge as well as the power challenge head on. And where does this solution work best? So this solution, because it is based on solar power and the concentration of solar energy, it works best in the latitudes around the equator or not far from the equator, let's say, like Nashville, Tennessee, and south, right? And then certainly South America, mid South America and north. So it works best in those latitudes where the solar radiance is strongest. Could it work in other latitudes? Sure. But you're not going to have the same effectiveness in terms of being able to generate power and generate the thermal energy in a shorter period of time, which is why it works best, in or near the tropic, type of latitudes. And so, the other thing that the solution does is everyone today is really focused on photovoltaic panels because there's been a significant investment in capacity of manufacturing those panels. The costs have come way down. It's very attractive. The battery technologies and lithium and otherwise have improved radically, not only in terms of performance, but also in terms of cost. But no one has solved the 24/7 problem with those. And so what this does is this changes the paradigm around being able to legitimately create not only a resilient, but a 24/7 base load power utility in a micro utility package. And so we're very, very excited about the opportunity. And so is Steve England's team. And you're going to be seeing many more developments. As you can imagine, a significant portion of our conversation during our last trip to Puerto Rico was around those micro utilities. If you look at my LinkedIn post, you can see that we met with the great folks at Fusion Farms. They're a startup like ourselves. They're more advanced than we are. They've got an operation in place right now with clients and everything else. They're making waves on the island, no pun intended. And Fusion Farms is an aquaponics company that is generating they're generating farmed goods, leafy greens and salads and sprouts and strawberries, you name it, all kinds of farmed vegetables and other things from aquaponics on the island. And as you can imagine, when you're running an aquaponics or a hydroponics facility, it consumes quite a bit of power. So not having a reliable power grid where they are at it's a real issue for them, from a business and a viability standpoint. So we're engaged in them with conversations around, can we create a viable micro utility to fulfill their needs? And then you can imagine the municipalities and other private developers that we're meeting with. One of the differentiators that they want to put an absolute spotlight on is, come to our resort or come to our municipality because we do have resilient power. We do have resilient, we have, first of all, we have a safe place during a hurricane, but then we also have these essential needs that are going to be available to you during a natural disaster. So very, very, meaningful and eye-opening for a lot of people as far as the micro utility is concerned. Was a great trip.
Love it. Love it. Look, David, you are going to be, of course, my friend, a guest on our future podcast sessions as well. There is just so much interest and relevance to what you and your team, you guys are doing. So it's just awesome. And thanks, man, again, be so gracious with your time, and looking forward to our continued conversations, and best wishes for your 6 to 12 month roadmap. I'm just personally so excited and thrilled about the potential of what you're doing. And I promised this one person that I would share their crazy thought with you as well. And this is going to sound both a little bit, American and crazy in a positive sense. And this person's comments are, David, build these resilient structures and Z-spheres and whatnot. And then this person, what he wants to do, David, with your Z-sphere is, he is a hurricane junkie. So he wants to time coming to Puerto Rico and wherever your structures are, so that he can enjoy being in the middle of a hurricane without being crushed by it. So apparently, David, you have people who want you to build theme parks around hurricanes, and they can be in their Z-spheres and enjoy the hurricane going around them and all those winds and the dynamics and the lightning and the water, and yet they are able to enjoy, their life. So it looks like there are some thrill seekers, if I may call them that, who want to, like this person is saying, well, I would just be rather there when, you are in the middle of some storm activity. So anyways, it looks like you have all kind of people who are interested in what you're doing. Thank you, sir. And I look forward to our continued conversations.
Likewise, Amjad. Thank you again, and look forward to next time.